Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast from Washington, D.C. I'm Nina Maria Potts and here are the top headlines for this hour. Japan's former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, the country's best-known politician and longest-serving leader, dies after being shot at an election campaign event. Days after the U.S. Supreme Court overturned the federal right to abortion, President Joe Biden will sign an executive order on abortion that, among other things, aims to protect the privacy of women seeking to end a pregnancy. The U.S. economy added 372,000 new jobs in June, more than what economists expected, while the unemployment rate held steady at 3.6% and wages rose, according to government data just released. As candidates ready for battle to replace Boris Johnson, calls are growing for him to leave straight away. The Labour Party aims to trigger a no-confidence vote if the Tories do not get rid of Johnson immediately. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov storms out of talks with G20 foreign ministers at a meeting in Indonesia, as Western powers criticize Moscow over its invasion in Ukraine. Japan's former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has been assassinated. He was 67 years old and was the longest-serving Prime Minister of Japan. Abe was fatally shot at a campaign rally earlier today. A man opened fire from behind with an allegedly homemade firearm as Abe addressed a rally in Japan's Nara city.
It is a barbarian act amid election campaigns which are the foundation of democracy and is absolutely unforgivable. I condemn with the strictest words.
The doctors of the Nara Medical University Hospital say Abe lost a lot of blood. They tried blood transfusion after a hemorrhage but could not save his life. Officials say the former Prime Minister showed no vital signs when he was airlifted to the hospital.
Our hospital made efforts to revive him, but unfortunately he passed away at 5:03 p.m. By the time he got to us, there were 2 bullet wounds in his neck. He was showing no signs of life, presumably due to the damage to his major blood vessels and heart. We performed a blood transfusion and also tried to stop the bleeding, but unfortunately he didn't make it.
The suspect, a 40-year-old gunman, was arrested at the scene of the attack. He is reported to be a former member of Japan's Maritime Self-Defense Force. We were earlier joined by Tomohiko Taniguchi from Tokyo. He is the former special advisor to the cabinet of Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Listen in to what he had to say.
It's definitely been a day of sadness and anger towards the criminal that killed the single greatest leader the nation has ever had. He was a transformative leader, a born strategist, and that his strategizing that was so natural brought Japan ever closer to India. India has always had a special place in Shinzo Abe, and I wonder if you could confirm with me a piece of news that I heard, that India is going to have a day of remembrance for Shinzo Abe. Japanese authorities, both government, bureaucracy, have lost words And it's been unanimous across the political spectrum, from the far left communist to his own party, of course, that stood up and condemned the brutal act. And the gun used was rumored to have been made by additive engineering, the 3D printing machine. How could we avoid such an adventurous act and brutal act? And that was a shock to the nation.
Speaking exclusively to WION's managing editor in May this year, the former Japanese Prime Minister spoke about the possibility of China invading Taiwan and its ramifications on Japan and the world. This turned out to be Shinzo Abe's last interview to any international channel.
What do you think the Chinese military is trying to do as they surround Taiwan, as they, satellite images have come out of them taking out certain targets? Do you think this is a pressure tactic? Do you think that the Chinese president is preparing to mount some sort of an invasion while the world remains distracted with Ukraine, with supply chain disruptions, with economic pressures?
Well,
what would be best scenario for China's perspective, of course, is for Taiwan to voluntarily become part of China, but such is not likely to occur. There are a couple of stories I can think of when it comes to how China would make happen one China story. For example, China could be on the very forefront of trying to have an influence over Taiwan as it makes Taiwan's situation unstable when it comes to political activities or economic activities. However, on that very point, I must not forget to mention that the current administration in Taiwan is a popular administration. There is quite a bit of stability when it comes to politics and economy. But, things might happen, and when that change comes, that would be a window of opportunity, I think, from the perspective of China. There is a great deal of influence over Taiwan from China, of course, as you know, economically and also in terms of media control.
When you say things might happen, are you suggesting that China might engineer political instability in Taiwan, and that would be the route that they would prefer?
There are various possibilities. The fact that China and Taiwan speak the same language, economically they are relying on each other. There's quite a bit of going back and forth between the two countries that gives us, a lot of touch points where things could possibly change. And the situation is different from the Ukraine situation.
What would a Chinese invasion of Taiwan, if it happens, mean for your country? Do you believe that American security guarantees are enough for Japan? Do you need an independent defense policy?
Well, being that geographically Taiwan is very close to Japan, we're only 110 kilometers apart. So if there is a war that outbreaks in Taiwan, of course, that is going to be an emergency situation for Japan and Japan alliance, naming Japan-US.
You had suggested that Japan should host U.S. nuclear missiles. Is that a suggestion that you still stand by?
Of course, when it comes to Japan's own defense, we should be enhancing our own defense, but at the same time, I think that there's a strong alliance between the U.S. and Japan when it comes to national security of Japan, specifically with regard to the nuclear deterrence power that the U.S. holds. Of course, we need to make sure that the system is refined over time, it's updated, but the nuclear deterrence in itself is a firm thing, it's a sure thing, and I think it secures Japan's safety.
Former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin has been sentenced to 21 years in prison on federal civil rights violations for the killing of George Floyd. U.S. District Judge Paul Magnuson criticized Chauvin for his actions, saying that what he did was simply wrong and offensive. Earlier in December, Chauvin pleaded guilty to separate civil rights charges. He's already serving a 22-year state prison sentence for the on-duty murder of George Floyd. The two sentences will run concurrently, and Chauvin will now be moved to a federal prison. Chauvin is convicted on murder and manslaughter charges in Minnesota for a 2020 incident where he knelt on Floyd's neck for more than 9 minutes, resulting in his death. After the verdict, Floyd's brother expressed regret that Chauvin did not get the maximum sentence possible.
I'm just upset that he didn't get the maximum amount of time. I just thought what everybody's seen on the video, that was a motion cinema picture. He had his knee on my brother's neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. Chauvin showed that he had no conscience, he showed no empathy, he showed no compassion.
Magnuson has not set sentencing dates for the 3 other officers who were on the scene: To Thao, Alexander Keung and Thomas Lane. All 3 were convicted of federal civil rights charges in February. For more, we're being joined by our New York correspondent, Susan Tehrani. Susan, what more do we know and what's the reaction been?
So Chauvin had a plea deal back in May, and so this plea deal sort of brought this sentence down a little bit. Magnuson accepted his plea deal and called for a sentence of 20 to 25 years. He shaved 7 months off of that 21-year sentence for time already he served last year, and he was already, as we know, convicted in a state court on murder and manslaughter charges related to Floyd's May 2020 death and sentenced to 22.5 years. He will serve in state and federal sentences concurrently in a federal prison. This is so he will possibly, at least for the most part, not run into some of the people he helped convict during his time as being a police officer.
Susan, thank you. Don't go away. We'll be back with you in just a moment. The foreign ministers of the G20 grouping are in Bali for annual talks before the November summit. The meeting was overshadowed by the war in Ukraine. However, ministers failed to reach common ground against Russia's attack on its neighbour. It's the first time since Russia's invasion of Ukraine that US Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov have been in the same room at the same time. But there were no exchanges.
You know, it was not us who abandoned all contacts. It was the United States. That's all I can say. And we are not running after anybody suggesting meetings. If they don't want to talk, it's their choice.
The Russian foreign minister walked out of the proceedings at least twice. Once when his German counterpart, Annalena Baerbock, spoke at the opening session. And again, just before Ukrainian foreign minister Dmytro Kuleba was to speak via video link during the second session.
The
Russian government does not want the United Nations to be part of the negotiations on grain exports. That the Russian foreign minister spent much of the negotiations here not in the room but outside the room underscores that there is not a millimeter of willingness on the part of the Russian government to talk at this time, especially on important issue of how we get this global food crisis under control. The Russian foreign minister was not present. It is therefore all the more important that we as the leading industrialized nations of the G7 now join forces to support the countries of the Global South.
Indonesian Foreign Minister Retno Marsudi urged the group to overcome mistrust for the sake of a planet confronting multiple challenges from coronavirus to climate change as well as Ukraine. Susan Tehrani is still with us. Susan, how high or how low are expectations around the G20? Will it actually achieve much?
Right. You know, consensus remains so elusive, not only because of this mistrust between the East and the West. You really have two pillars with opposing politics and ideologies, not only regarding the Ukraine crisis that we're seeing, but other issues as well, with recent news of NATO's expansionist ambitions. And then you also have China really expanding as well beyond Taiwan, and Russia, you know, making recent statements saying that Ukraine is just the beginning and talks really not coming at the negotiating table now. The later talks are held, the more difficult that they will be. And this is the atmosphere that G20 is taking part in. And then you have two somewhat unrelated issues that are hovering over at least today's meeting, and that is, of course, the assassination of Shinzo Abe and the resignation of Boris Johnson. So yes, expectations are very low, but as we also saw the Indonesian foreign minister alluding to the fact that it's really the poorest countries of the world that are taking the brunt of the problems that the international community are facing, which is really the food shortage crisis and the fuel crisis as well.
Thank you, Susan. That was Susan Tehrani, our correspondent with live analysis from New York. China has once again reiterated its claim over Taiwan. The South Asian nation has put the island's reunification strategy at the heart of its national revival plans. The country has been conducting military drills in the Taiwan Strait to show its military might and to convey its intent to supporters of Taiwan's independence. Reiterating its stand on the island region, the head of the Taiwan Affairs Office, Liu Jieyi, said reunification should be promoted as part of the country's rejuvenation, and this would serve as the main goal of Beijing's new plan on Taiwan. He further added that the strategy would also focus on preventing and resolving major risks in the Taiwan Strait, creating a favourable environment for national rejuvenation. The Chinese leader warned against other nations backing Taiwan, saying, "We do not promise to renounce the use of force and reserve the option of taking all necessary measures. The purpose is to protect peaceful reunification and the fundamental interests of China." The remarks come at a time when US Senator Rick Scott is on a Taiwan visit. Referring to Russia's Ukraine invasion, the US Senator affirmed efforts to defend the island's freedom. Scott's visit came against the backdrop of China's claims of conducting multi-unit joint combat readiness exercises and patrols and combat drills in the sea and airspace around Taiwan.
I think we all realize when we watch what Putin did in Ukraine that the world has changed. We all have to put ourselves in a position that we can make sure we defend the freedom we all believe in. And I think it's important that while each of Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea care about their own security, that the United States and all freedom-loving countries across the world do everything we can to help.
China's communist regime has vowed to punish independent forces and crack down on foreign interference many times when it comes to Taiwan. Beijing regards the autonomous island a breakaway province and has never shied away from making claims to take it back by force if the need arises. In recent years, China has also stepped up military activities near Taiwan. Beijing's recent statements and actions have the Taiwanese on high alert, with civilians now proactively studying urban warfare to strengthen their defences against China's increasing military might.
This beast here is Taiwan's domestically built advanced jet trainer, the T-5 Brave Eagle. From submarines to armoured vehicles, Taiwan has been focused on strengthening its domestic defense programs, with self-reliance now key, especially after Russia's war on Ukraine, which has served as a grim reminder of the plausibility of Chinese invasion that has rekindled the need to bolster defenses.
Defense is offense. The best way to protect ourselves, to put it bluntly, is to annihilate the enemy and stop any enemy advances.
It's not just the Taiwanese military. Taking inspiration from the fierce resistance of civilians in Ukraine, Taiwanese people are now taking up urban warfare studies. The number of students studying urban warfare, firearm studies and first aid courses has quadrupled.
Since the start of the Russia-Ukraine war in late February, there has been an increase of 2 to 4 times more people enrolled in our various courses.
Prepare your umbrella before it rains. We don't know when things are going to happen.
China's growing military might and the increased frequency of incursions doesn't inspire much confidence. So here they are, people from various walks of life, taking up arms and undergoing drills, determined to protect their country as they prepare for the worst. Bureau Report, WION. World is One.
8 years after his regime was toppled in an uprising, the former president of Burkina Faso has returned to the country.
Former President Blaise Compaoré flew out of exile and into Burkina Faso on Thursday, after an 8-year absence. And that's despite having been convicted in absentia in April of complicity in the murder of charismatic Marxist revolutionary Thomas Sankara. Compaoré, who fled the West African country after being ousted in a coup, arrived for a meeting with interim President Henri Paul Damiba and other former leaders. His niece, Marceline Yameogo, said she was very pleased.
We must forgive each other and go for reconciliation, because the nation needs all its sons and daughters for its development. It is not with insecurity and quarrelling that we will build a better Burkina.
Sankara, who earned a reputation as Africa's Che Guevara, was gunned down in 1987, 4 years after seizing power in a coup. Lawyers for Sankara's family had demanded Compaoré, who was handed a life sentence in April, be arrested on arrival. Burkinabe media have been speculating he could be granted a pardon. Compaoré and other former leaders are in the country for a reconciliation summit amid rising insurgency-linked insecurity. It's being hosted by Damiba, who took power in a January coup. Member of Parliament Lassiane Ouedraogo said diplomacy had been set in motion and that we all have to be a part of that. Compaoré was flown by helicopter to the presidential palace after his plane arrived in Ouagadougou from Ivory Coast. He's been living there since the uprising that ended his nearly 3 decades in power. Ivory Coast has repeatedly refused to extradite Compaoré and said his return had been agreed with Burkinabe authorities.
President Joe Biden has awarded the Medal of Freedom to 17 people as the White House hosted some of the country's finest. Among them were 2 Olympic athletes and an Oscar-winning actor, Denzel Washington.
Proof that we'll not grow numb to the epidemic of gun violence in this nation. Proof that we can channel the pain and sorrow we see too often in America into a movement that will prevail. With her husband, the United States Senator Mark Kelly, who, by the way, was that astronaut you all remember. She is more consequential, I acknowledge, but...
That is all we have on this edition. We'll be back on Monday. Until then, stay tuned to WION for all the latest global updates.
There are many other
additional break, Arab.